The multiverse breathed. That was the only way the monitors had ever been able to describe it. The slow, rhythmic expansion and contraction of reality itself. Infinite universes pressing against one another like lungs drawing air. Each breath a billion years. Each exhale the death of stars. Since the events of death metal, since the hands had reshaped, existence and the multiverse had been restored to something resembling order. The breathing had been steady, measured, almost peaceful, almost. The tear opened without warning. No boom tube signature. No speed force displacement. No magical ritual or phantom zone fracture. Just a sound, a single, resonant crack, like the universe clearing its throat. And then a column of golden light punched through the sky above. Metropolis's eastern harbor. 40 meters wide and burning with an energy that no Kryptonian sensor array, no own database, no mother box in Cyborg's chest could immediately classify. It lasted 11 seconds. Then it collapsed inward on itself, and the golden light was gone. What remained, standing knee-deep in the harbor water, soaking wet, dressed in an orange GI that had seen better centuries, was a man. He looked up at the metropolis skyline with an expression that managed to be simultaneously awestruck and deeply, profoundly inconvenienced. Huh, said Son Goku. This isn't the hyperbolic time chamber. He had been mid-Kamehameha when it happened, a training exercise against a construct of his own. He, pushing the upper boundaries of his base, forms output in preparation for a sparring session with Vegeta, that the prince of all science would inevitably claim he'd won regardless of outcome. The wave had connected with something it shouldn't have been able to connect with, a weakness in the dimensional fabric, a hairline fracture left behind from two colliding cosmic forces whose names Goku neither knew nor particularly cared about. The energy had done what Goku's energy always eventually did, exceeded every reasonable expectation, and the fracture had become a doorway. He'd felt it the moment he crossed through. The air was different here. Not wrong, exactly, but dense with something he couldn't immediately name. His ki flickered at the edges, like a candle in wind, and he steadied it, automatically with the ease of someone who had learned to breathe fire and found the habit irreversible. The sun above him was yellow, which was familiar, and the city before him was enormous and gleaming and full of the particular kind of desperate hope that only very large cities could generate. That sense that somewhere in all this noise and steel, something magnificent was happening. He liked it immediately. What he liked considerably less was the arena. He hadn't noticed it at first. His attention had been on the skyline, on the strange density of the air, on the way his ki sat in his chest like a slightly impatient passenger. But as he waded toward the harbor's edge, he felt the pull, not physical, something older, a resonance in the dimensional fabric around him, a pocket of reality that didn't quite match the rest, thinner, somehow, like a piece of paper held up to light. And behind the paper, darkness and the smell of old blood and the particular psychic pressure of 10,000 combatants who had died in a place built specifically for dying. The portal was barely visible, a shimmer in the air between two abandoned warehouse structures at the harbor's edge, pulsing with a sickly purple-black light that Goku's scion instincts recognized as the signature of something genuinely dangerous. His hand was on it before he'd consciously decided to touch it. He felt the magic reach for him, not Shazam's clean lightning or Zatanna's structured incantation, but something older and hungrier. Shang Tsung's residual sorcery woven into dimensional framework, the dying echo of a tournament that had bled across realities. It recognized a fighter. It pulled. Goku, to his eternal credit, grinned. Okay, he said, to no one in particular. Let's see what's in there. The arena manifested around him like a memory of violence. Stone pillars ancient enough to predate writing. Torches burning with green-black flame. A sky the color of a bruise. Stretched over a landscape that existed nowhere natural. The Netherrealm's outermost pocket. Bleeding into DC's multiverse through the fracture Goku's own energy had widened. Sustained by Shang Tsung's soul magic even in the sorcerer's absence. It smelled like copper and ozone in the particular staleness of places that had never known fresh air. The combatants who remained were not Earthrealm's champions. They were the residue, fighters trapped in the pocket dimension when the fracture opened. unable to return to their origin realities, sustained by the arenas. Magic with the particular cruelty of being kept strong enough to fight, but not strong enough to escape. They were tall, and they were scarred, and they wore the particular expression of people who had been killing to survive for long enough that they'd stopped noticing. They looked at Goku. Goku looked at them. His power level in this pocket dimension was interesting. Not diminished exactly, but the dimensional compression meant that his key output registered differently here. The arena's magic creating a kind of pressure that he'd need to push against. He was, conservatively, still the most powerful thing in the room by several orders of magnitude. But he could feel the magic trying to categorize him. Shang Tsung's residual sorcery searching. His soul for the tournaments. Framework, fighter, champion, chosen, and finding something it couldn't entirely process. The largest combatant. A warrior with arms like structural columns and eyes that had forgotten mercy. Raised a weapon that crackled with netherrealm energy. Goku raised his hands in his habitual fighting stance. Weight balanced. He steady. The grin on his face completely genuine. "I'm not here to fight," he said, which was technically true. Then, after a brief pause, "But I'm not going to not fight either, if that's what this is." The warrior charged. The battle that followed lasted approximately 45 seconds, which was approximately 40 seconds longer than it needed to be, because Goku spent the first 35 of them figuring out exactly how much force was appropriate in a dimension where the magic was actively trying to feed on violence. He pulled his punches down to something that would, in a normal context, merely be extraordinary, and worked his way through 6 combatants with the methodical efficiency of someone who had trained under gods and found them adequately challenging. By the time he stepped out of the portal and back into Metropolis's harbor air, the arena behind him was very quiet. He was still grinning. Somewhere above him, in the communications network that connected every major monitoring station in DC's Prime Earth, an alert had been quietly, urgently activated. Unknown energy signature. Unknown combatant. Unknown origin. Superman was already moving. And in the Batcave, beneath Wayne Manor, a man who made it his business to know everything about every threat to his city and his planet, stared at a readout that told him nothing, and felt the particular cold clarity of genuine uncertainty. Batman did not like uncertainty. He liked it even less when it arrived in Metropolis and smelled like another universe's magic. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. Hope shines brightest in the darkest night. Superman arrived the way he always did, without announcement, without theater, just suddenly present. A blue and red certainty, descending from the sky with the particular stillness of someone who had long since stopped needing to hurry because speed was no longer the point. He landed 20 meters from Goku on the harbor's concrete edge, cape settling around him, and took exactly 1 second to assess the situation with eyes that could see through walls and a mind that had cataloged every known energy signature in 37 star systems. He had never seen anything like what stood before him. Not the man himself. The man looked human enough, if unusually relaxed for someone who had apparently just emerged from a dimensional tear while soaking wet in an orange GI. What Superman couldn't categorize was the energy. His vision swept through every spectrum simultaneously: infrared, ultraviolet, X-ray, electromagnetic. The man's cellular structure was close to human, but not quite. Denser. The musculature wound tight in ways that suggested evolutionary adaptation to combat rather than any natural biological process. And the energy threaded through him, golden at its core and expanding outward in slow, rhythmic pulses, was unlike anything in the own database or Kryptonian science archives. It wasn't speed force. It wasn't magical in the Lords of Order sense. It wasn't emotional spectrum energy or new god technology. It was something older, and it was enormous. And it was currently being held in check with the casual ease of someone carrying a lit match in a hurricane while thinking about lunch. "You came through the harbor breach," Superman said. Not an accusation. An observation from a man who had learned, at considerable cost, that accusations were less useful than understanding. Goku turned toward the voice, and his expression shifted, not to wariness, not to the combat-ready assessment that most beings in the universe would produce when a Kryptonian descended from the sky. Instead, his head tilted slightly. His eyes narrowed, with the focus of someone whose primary method of evaluating the world was tactile and energetic rather than visual. And he said, "You're strong." It landed between them not as flattery, but as pure data point. Clinical, almost. The way a seismograph reports an earthquake. Superman processed this. "So are you," he said, because his own senses had already confirmed it beyond any reasonable doubt. "I've never encountered your energy signature before. What's your name?" "Goku. Son Goku." He paused. "You can call me Goku." "Everyone does, eventually." "Clark Kent." The name came naturally. Superman's long-standing practice of leading with humanity rather than the symbol. "Where are you from?" The answer took longer than expected. Not because Goku was evasive, but because he was genuinely working through the cosmological logistics. He explained, in the patient and slightly roundabout way of someone who understood things physically before understanding them intellectually, about Dragon Ball's universe, the Kais, the gods of destruction, the tournament of power, the dimensional framework that apparently bore no relationship whatsoever to DC's multiverse architecture. Superman listened with the focused attention of a man who had encountered enough impossible things to know that dismissing them was the luxury of people who hadn't. "You punched through dimensional fabric," Superman said when Goku finished. "The Kamehameha did, yeah? I was pushing harder than usual." He scratched the back of his head. Vegeta's going to be so annoyed. Before Superman could respond, the second presence made itself known, not through arrival. Because Batman rarely arrived so much as he simply was suddenly there. Having been there, perhaps, for longer than anyone realized. He stepped from the shadow of a shipping container that provided no logical concealment for a man in a black cape, which meant he had been using the container's shadow as cover for the conversation, rather than approaching during it. The dimensional breach registered on 12 separate monitoring systems. Batman said, his voice carrying the particular flat quality of someone delivering a briefing, rather than having a conversation. The energy signature preceded it by 4 seconds, which means the breach was caused by whatever he generates, not the other way around. His eyes, the only part of his face, the cowl left visible, moved across Goku with the systematic precision of a man filing information in categories. The pocket dimension on the other side of the breach is netherrealm adjacent. 6 combatants inside are unconscious. None are dead. "I didn't want to hurt them too badly," Goku said, with the mild apologetic tone of someone acknowledging they'd perhaps been slightly careless at a dinner party. The magic in there was strange. It kept trying to absorb things. "I didn't want to give it too much to work with." Batman's expression did not change. This was, in Batman's emotional vocabulary, extremely significant. You recognized the dimensional magic as a threat vector and adjusted your power output accordingly, while in an unfamiliar dimension, immediately upon arrival. "I mean, it wasn't that complicated." "It's extremely complicated." Batman turned to Superman. "His tactical awareness is instinctive. That's not training. That's decades of lethal combat experience translated into reflex." Back to Goku. "How long have you been fighting?" Goku considered this. "Since I was a kid. I'm over 40 now, if you don't count the time I was dead." He paused. "I've been dead twice." "Well, more than twice, technically, but the other times don't really." "You've died," Batman said. "Yeah, multiple times. It happens." Goku shrugged with the equanimity of someone for whom mortality had become more of a recurring inconvenience than an existential concern. "Is there someone here who handles dimensional problems? I'd like to figure out how to get home before Chi-Chi notices I'm gone. She'll assume I went training again, and she'll be right. Technically, but the explanation is going to be complicated." Superman almost smiled. The warmth in him, the Kansas raised, genuinely believes in people warmth that no amount of cosmic horror had yet managed to fully extinguish, responded to Goku with the instinctive recognition of a fundamentally decent person. Everything his senses told him about this man's energy, this key, suggested something that matched Superman's own internal framework, power held in service of protection, strength oriented toward others. A fighter who fought because the alternative was letting people get hurt. Batman's contingency files, silently updating in the back of his mind, told him something different. Not contradictory, Batman didn't dismiss Superman's instincts, which were better than most people gave them credit for. But the files noted, power level unquantified, upper limit unknown, combat experience extreme. Power output control appears voluntary, which means it can become involuntary. Origin dimensions physics unknown. Dimensional breach, caused by standard training exercise, which means this is not his maximum. Motive unverified. The file was labeled with Batman's characteristic economy of language. Unknown variable, priority assessment. I know people who can help with the dimensional question, Superman said. Constantine, Zatanna, they've worked with breach mechanics before. But first, I need to understand something. He met Goku's eyes directly. The way Clark Kent had learned to look at people when he wanted them to know he was actually looking. The arena you were in, the combatants. What happened in there? I knocked them out, Goku said simply. They came at me. I didn't know why yet. So I didn't want to. He searched for the word. Overcommit. The magic was reading the violence, using it. So I kept it clean. You had the capacity to do significantly more, Batman said. It wasn't a question. Yeah. And you chose not to. Obviously. Goku looked at Batman with mild puzzlement. The expression of someone who found the question slightly strange. They were stuck in there. They weren't fighting because they wanted to. They were fighting because that's what the place was making them do. You don't punish people for what a trap makes them do. You break the trap. The silence that followed was approximately 3 seconds long. In Batman's internal calculus, it was the most informative 3 seconds of the encounter. He filed it, updated the contingency document, changed one designation from unknown, variable, priority assessment, to something slightly different. He didn't share the update. He never shared the updates. But Superman caught the microscopic shift in Batman's posture. The almost imperceptible reduction in the particular tension that Batman carried specifically for genuine threats, and understood what it meant. Above them, in the communications network, another alert had been activated. This one reached a Watchtower satellite feed, a signal from an apocalypse monitoring drone that had been orbiting Earth's upper atmosphere for 3 months, cataloging energy signatures for Lord Darkseid's ongoing assessment of Prime Earth's defensive capabilities. The drone had registered Goku's key at the moment of arrival. It had immediately transmitted to Apocalypse. The response had not yet come, but it would. Wonder Woman found them on the harbor's edge 40 minutes later, which was 40 minutes after she had been the first of the Trinity to receive Batman's alert and 20 minutes after she had diverted from a diplomatic function in Geneva that 3 heads of state would spend the next week pretending had not been abruptly vacated by an Amazon princess in evening, who had excused herself to handle what the alert had classified, with Batman's characteristic understatement, as a dimensional anomaly requiring physical assessment. She arrived in full armor. This was a choice. Diana Prince was sophisticated enough in the language of first contact to understand that arriving in armor rather than civilian clothes communicated something specific, that she was here as a warrior assessing another warrior, not as a diplomat managing a situation. She had read Batman's preliminary file on the harbor in the 30 seconds between receiving the alert and stepping off the javelin, and what she had read had produced in her chest the particular resonance she associated with recognizing something genuinely significant. The file said, power level unquantified. It said, combat experience extreme. It said, chose restraint when restraint was tactically unnecessary. Diana had known approximately for beings in her 3,000 years of life who combined those 3 qualities. 2 of them were standing on the harbor when she landed. She studied Goku the way she had learned to study warriors, not with Batman's analytical categorization or Superman's empathic warmth, but with the older and more physical intelligence of someone who had spent millennia understanding combat as a language. She read it in the way he stood, weight distributed with the ease of someone for whom balance was as natural as breathing, hands relaxed at his sides but the tendons in his forearms carrying the ghost of a ready position, the subtle forward lean of a fighter whose default orientation was always slightly toward engagement. She read it in his eyes, which were currently watching her with the same bright, uncomplicated assessment that she recognized. From the best warriors she had ever known, not calculating, not aggressive, but genuinely, almost joyfully curious. He was reading her back. She could feel it. "You're a warrior," she said. Not a question. "Yeah," Goku said. "You too." Diana almost smiled. She turned to Superman. His energy? Unclassified. Nothing in any database. He calls it Ki. It's his universe's fundamental energy system. It's enormous. Superman paused. He was holding it at minimal output when I arrived. He's been at minimal output the entire time. Diana returned her attention to Goku. "What is your maximum output?" Goku scratched the back of his head again, a gesture. Diana was already identifying as his physical tell for mild social uncertainty, which was interesting because nothing about his combat posture suggested any uncertainty at all. That's kind of a complicated question. I have different forms, different levels. The highest one I can access is called Ultra Instinct. He paused, apparently searching for a frame of reference. It's the state where my body moves without my mind getting in the way. Pure instinct. Perfect response. Diana was quiet for a moment. The harbor wind moved her hair across her shoulders. "In 3,000 years," she said, "I have met two beings who described something similar. One was Ares, god of war, at his full divine power. The other was my father, Zeus." She held Goku's gaze steadily. "Neither of them achieved it through training. They were born to it." "I wasn't born to it," Goku said. "It took me my whole life. I still can't always access it when I want to." Something moved behind Diana's eyes, old and deep and complicated. The expression of a woman who had spent 3 millennia learning the difference between power that was given and power that was earned, and had strong opinions about which one meant more. "Show me," she said. "Batman, from his position 3 meters to the left," said Diana. "Not his maximum," she clarified, without looking at Batman. "Something honest. I want to understand what I'm looking at." Goku looked at her for a moment, then at Superman, then back at Diana. Then he nodded, with the simple directness of someone who understood exactly what was being asked and found it a completely reasonable request. He powered up to Super Saiyan. The golden light came gradually, not the explosive burst he used in combat, but a controlled emergence, the way someone might turn up a lamp's wick rather than striking a match. His hair rose and shifted from black to gold. His eyes changed, and the Ki expanded outward, in a corona that the harbor water responded to immediately. Concentric ripples, spreading from where he stood as the air pressure changed around him. The energy was warm, not hot, not aggressive, but carrying the particular quality of something that was fundamentally oriented toward life rather than destruction. Superman felt it in his chest. The Kryptonian cells responding to the energy surge with the instinctive alertness of a solar-powered body detecting a new light source. His eyes went wide. Diana felt it differently. The warrior part of her, the part that had been trained since childhood to read combat energy the way other people read weather, felt the Ki like a physical wind. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt the particular focused attention of someone who respected what they were looking at. "This is not your full capacity," she said. "No," Goku said. His voice was different in this form, not deeper, exactly, but carrying more resonance, more weight. "There are forms beyond this one, several of them, and in those forms, the harbor would be a problem," he said, with the matter-of-fact honesty of someone reporting a weather forecast, "and probably several blocks around it." He powered back down. The golden light receded. The water stilled. The three of them stood in the aftermath of it. And what Batman said next surprised everyone, including, based on his expression, himself. "I need you to come to Gotham." Goku blinked. "Why?" "Because," Batman said, with the patience of someone delivering a conclusion rather than building toward one, "the dimensional breach you created has been logged by every monitoring system on the planet. Within 24 hours, every faction that pays attention to anomalous energy signatures will know you're here. That includes people who will want to study you, people who will want to recruit you, and people who will want to determine whether you represent a threat that needs to be eliminated." He paused. "Gotham has infrastructure for managing situations that the rest of the world isn't ready for. And I have questions that require answers before this becomes unmanageable. Questions Goku repeated. About your energy, your forms, your universe's physics. Whether the breach can be stabilized or whether it will continue to expand. Whether the Netherrealm pocket dimension, on the other side, is self-contained. Or whether it will begin bleeding into prime Earth's magical framework. Batman's eyes were steady and utterly serious. And whether whatever tracked you through the breach followed you here. This last point landed with appropriate weight. Goku's expression shifted, not to fear. Goku's face apparently didn't do fear in any conventional sense, but to the particular focused attention of someone who had just been reminded of a variable they'd been too excited to properly consider. The arena, he said slowly. The magic was reading the violence. You think it logged me. I think Shang Tsung's residual sorcery in a Netherrealm adjacent pocket dimension just cataloged a power signature it's never encountered and filed it. Somewhere, Batman said. And Netherrealm has a hierarchy. Hierarchies have lords. Lords are ambitious. Diana's hand moved instinctively to the hilt of her sword, not drawing it, just touching it, the warrior's equivalent of checking that a tool was available. Trigon, she said quietly. Or Naren. Or something older. Possibly, Batman said. Probably. His eyes returned to Goku. So, Gotham. Tonight. And I'll need you to not destroy anything while we work out the dimensional mechanics. Goku considered this for approximately 2 seconds. The harbor, the skyline, the strange dense air of this universe pressing against his key like a question he didn't yet know how to answer, and then nodded with the decisive simplicity of someone who had made more complicated decisions under considerably more dangerous circumstances. Sure, he said, but someone needs to explain to me how to find food here. I haven't eaten since before the breach, and I'm a scion, so that's going to be expensive, Superman said. And the warmth in his voice was completely unguarded. Above them, in the stratosphere, the Apocalypse drone completed its analysis. The transmission it sent was brief, a single compressed data packet containing Goku's key signature, the dimensional origin analysis, and one word that Darkseid's translator units rendered in 17 languages simultaneously. The word was significant. Gotham City received Son Goku the way Gotham received everything, with rain. It came in sideways off the bay, the particular aggressive Gotham rain that seemed less like weather and more like the city's immune response. Its attempt to flush out anything that didn't belong. The gargoyles on the older buildings channeled it into streams that ran black with decades of accumulated grime, and the streets below absorbed it without complaint, having long since accepted that they would never be clean. Neon signs bled their colors into the puddles. Somewhere in the Narrows, 3 different sirens were competing for the same frequency. The city smelled like diesel and rust and the particular exhausted hope of 10 million people who had decided, against all available evidence, to keep living here. Goku stood on a Batcave platform in a dry GI. Alfred had produced a replacement from somewhere that Bruce Wayne's wardrobe apparently contained without comment, which said something about the nature of life in Wayne Manor, and looked at the largest computer system he had ever encountered, with the expression of someone who found technology interesting in the abstract, but fundamentally trusted his fists more than his screens. The Batcave itself had produced in him the same reaction it produced in almost everyone who saw it. For the first time, a moment of stillness, a recalibration of expectations, not because of the computer or the vehicles, or the trophy cases that held the artifacts of 30 years of war against Gotham's darkness, because of the bats, thousands of them, moving in the cave's upper darkness, with the fluid collective intelligence of a single organism, their echolocation painting the space in frequencies that Goku's Scion hearing caught at the edge of perception, a constant, living map of the cave's geography, updated every fraction of a second. You live here, Goku said. I work here, Batman said, which was technically accurate and practically meaningless. The Batcave's analysis systems had been running on Goku's key signature for 2 hours. What they had returned was simultaneously more and less than Batman had hoped. More? Because the data was extraordinarily detailed, painting a picture of an energy system of almost incomprehensible sophistication, layered, adaptive, responsive to the user's emotional and psychological state, capable of outputs that the Batcave's Modeling systems projected at somewhere between a low-yield nuclear device and base form and something the computer tactfully labeled insufficient. Data for the higher forms. Less, because the data told Batman almost nothing about how to counter it, which was the question Batman had been quietly asking since the harbor. He hadn't told Goku that was the question. He had told Goku they needed to understand his energy for the breach analysis. Both things were true. Batman was comfortable with the overlap. The breach is stable, he said, pulling up a holographic display that mapped the harbor's dimensional topology in 3 dimensions. For now, the Netherrealm pocket is self-contained. The arena's magic is sustaining its own boundary. But your key punched through the dimensional fabric because this universe's physics didn't have a category for it. That's the problem. What kind of problem? Goku asked, leaning forward to study the hologram with genuine interest. Reality categorizes energy in order to contain it. Speed force, magical energy, emotional spectrum, Kryptonian solar absorption. These are all systems Prime Earth's dimensional framework knows how to handle. Your key is foreign to that framework. Right now, it's tolerated because your output is low enough that reality is treating it as a local anomaly. Batman highlighted a section of the holographic display where the dimensional topology showed hairline stress fractures, invisible to any sensor system below his Batcave's resolution. If you push significantly higher, those fractures propagate. At your upper forms, the math suggests reality would need to make room for your energy the same way it made room for the breach. By breaking, Goku was quiet for a moment, studying the fractures with the focused attention of someone who had destroyed enough planets in his lifetime, accidentally, mostly, to take dimensional stability seriously. So I can't go Super Saiyan Blue or Ultra Instinct. Not without risk. Not until we understand the framework better. Batman paused. Constantine is coming. He should be here within the hour. He's worked with dimensional physics from the magical side. If anyone can explain how to integrate your energy into Prime Earth's framework without catastrophic consequences, it's him. Possibly Zatanna. Will they help? Batman's expression communicated, without words, the complex nature of John Constantine's relationship with the concept of help. Constantine will assess whether you're useful to him. If you are, he'll assist while making it appear entirely coincidental. Zatanna is more straightforward. From the cave's upper platform, a dry British voice descended. Master Bruce, Mr. Goku, is it? There is a gentleman at the manor's east entrance who smells strongly of cigarettes, cheap whiskey, and what I can only describe as the ambient odor of very poor decisions. He says you're expecting him. Send him down, Alfred. John Constantine arrived in the Batcave the way he arrived everywhere, like he'd been there before and found it slightly disappointing. He was in his habitual rumpled suit, tie loosened, cigarette burning at the corner of his mouth despite the Batcave's ventilation systems, which had immediately begun working harder. He looked at the holographic display, then at Goku, then at Batman, and the particular expression that crossed. His face was one that Batman had learned to identify over years of reluctant collaboration. Constantine had already done his homework. Right, Constantine said, by way of greeting. The dimensional breach in the harbor. I felt it from London. He studied Goku with the eyes of someone who had spent decades reading the magical signatures of beings who could, in the world and had, developed opinions about all of them. You're not from the bleed. Not from the dark multiverse. Not from any monitor-adjacent reality. I've cataloged. He took a long drag of the cigarette. Your energy's got a moral component. Did you know that? Goku blinked. A moral component? Yeah? I've done my reading in the last 2 hours. Don't look impressed. In your universe's magical framework, Ki reflects character. Pure heart, strong Ki. Corrupted heart, corrupted Ki. Constantine gestured with the cigarette. In this universe, that maps to something specific. The emotional spectrum, the lantern core system, operates on a similar principle. Will, fear, hope, rage, love, compassion, avarice. Your Ki is resonating with at least 3 of those frequencies. Simultaneously, he paused. Mostly will and hope, which means your energy is technically compatible with Prime Earth's magical framework. It just needs a translator. Can you build one? Batman asked. I can perform a ritual that will help his energy integrate with Prime Earth's dimensional framework without causing the fractures to propagate. Yes. Constantine looked at his cigarette. I'm going to need something from him in return. What? Goku asked. Information. Your universe's magical framework, the Dragon Balls, the Kais, the gods of destruction. These are cosmological systems I've never had access to. I want an hour of your time after the ritual. Questions and answers. He met Goku's eyes with the direct, unembarrassed calculation of a man who had long since stopped pretending his generosity was unconditional. Fair trade. You get stability, I get knowledge. Goku shrugged. Sure, I like talking about that stuff. Constantine blinked. He had clearly prepared for negotiation and found its absence mildly disorienting. Right? Well, he stubbed the cigarette out on the heel of his shoe in a way that made Alfred visibly tighten. We'll need the cave's east chamber, and I'll need absolute quiet for 20 minutes. Which means, he looked at Batman. You need to not hover. Batman hovered. He simply did it from further away and with better concealment. The ritual took 37 minutes. Constantine worked in the practiced, economical style of someone who had performed impossible things often enough to have developed efficient methodology, chalk lines. On the cave floor, a sequence of backwards spoken words that made the bats in the upper darkness fall momentarily silent. A brief and businesslike negotiation with something that existed in the space between dimensions and apparently owed Constantine a favor. When it was done, Goku's ki settled differently. Not weaker, if anything, slightly cleaner. The integration smoothing out the friction between his energy and Prime Earth's dimensional framework. The stress fractures in Batman's holographic display closed. One by one, like seams healing. Better, Constantine said, lighting another cigarette. You can push to your intermediate forms now without breaking reality. The higher ones, he exhaled, I wouldn't. Ultra instinct, Goku said. Whatever that is, if it's your absolute ceiling, no? Not yet. The framework needs time to fully integrate. He looked at Goku with an expression that was as close to respect as Constantine's face usually managed. Your energy is remarkably clean. In 30 years of working with beings who have this kind of power, I've met maybe 4 whose key equivalent was this uncorrupted. A pause. Don't let this universe change that. It has a way of getting into things. Batman filed this, updated the contingency document, changed one variable's probability assessment. Outside, across the city, in a penthouse office that occupied the top 3 floors of LexCorp Tower, a man in a perfectly tailored suit stood at a floor-to-ceiling window and watched a holographic readout that his most sophisticated monitoring systems had spent 2 hours compiling. Lex Luthor read the data with the particular focused pleasure of someone who had just discovered a new and very interesting problem. His fingers moved across the display, pulling the key analysis apart layer by layer, examining the dimensional breach data, reviewing the Batcave's power grid fluctuation that his systems had logged during the ritual. He was already thinking about applications. He was already thinking about leverage. He was already, with the methodical patience of the most dangerous human being on Earth, thinking about what it would mean to have access to a power source that Batman didn't know how to stop and Superman couldn't categorize. He poured himself a glass of scotch and smiled. The smile of a man who had just decided to be very, very helpful to a stranger. Fawcett City existed in the particular geographical and spiritual space between Metropolis's gleaming optimism and Gotham's grinding darkness. Not quite either. Earnestly attempting to be the former while occasionally sliding toward the latter. A city that had decided collectively and somewhat heroically to believe in magic. Because magic had, in fact, saved it repeatedly, and the evidence was difficult to argue with. It had a different quality of light than either of its more famous neighbors. Warmer, less curated than Metropolis's deliberate brightness, less theatrical than Gotham's deliberate shadow. The kind of light that suggested someone had simply left the windows open. Billy Batson was 16 years old and had, at various points in his relatively brief life, held the wisdom of Solomon, the strength of Hercules, the stamina of Atlas, the power of Zeus, the courage of Achilles, and the speed of Mercury, simultaneously in a body that could go toe-to-toe with Superman and survive. He had also, in the past 48 hours, failed 2 math tests, burned his breakfast, and been told by his foster sister Mary that his fashion sense was, quote, aggressively tragic. He was sitting on the roof of the Vasquez family home watching the city's evening settle into itself when he felt it. Not saw, felt. The magical component of Shazam's power, the divine framework that connected Billy to 6 legendary sources, simultaneously functioned partly as a kind of cosmic antenna, sensitive to significant concentrations of power in ways that Superman's physical senses and Batman's technological infrastructure couldn't quite replicate. It was why Billy had known about the Spectre's involvement in a crisis 3 weeks before. Batman's monitoring systems had logged it. It was why Zatanna called him occasionally to ask if he'd felt anything strange, because strange things registered on Billy's magical awareness the way weather registered on a barometer. What he felt now was enormous, clean, warm in a way that magical energy rarely was. Most significant power sources in DC's framework carried the particular psychic weight of their origin, and origins were complicated. Lords of Order felt like mathematics. Chaos magic felt like noise. Darkseid's Omega energy felt like the absence of choice. Even Superman's solar-charged power, which was fundamentally benign, carried the faint cold quality of something that came from outside Earth's natural systems. This was different. This felt like someone had concentrated the essential quality of a person, their determination, their joy, their fundamental orientation toward the world, and made it into energy. It felt, Billy thought, like what he imagined the wizard Shazam's power felt like before it got filtered through 6 separate legendary sources and a magic word in a 16-year-old's understanding of heroism. He said the word. Lightning struck the roof. The thunder followed immediately. The particular Shazam thunder. That was less atmospheric, event, and more divine punctuation. Billy Batson became Captain Marvel, became Shazam. In the space between the lightning and the thunder, the transformation, so practiced now that he barely registered the shift from teenager to demigod, from small and uncertain to large and capable, from the boy who'd failed 2 math tests to the man who carried the power of gods in borrowed mythology. He was in the air before the thunder finished. Batman had communicated Goku's location as part of the League's standard information protocol, not because Batman trusted widely, but because he understood that information controlled was more useful than information hoarded, and Shazam's magical sensitivity made him a relevant variable in any situation involving unclassified energy. What Batman's message had not communicated, because Batman's messages communicated facts rather than tone, was the specific quality of the energy, or why Billy, flying toward Gotham's outskirts where Goku had apparently relocated for a training assessment, felt increasingly like he was flying toward something that rhymed with himself. He found Goku in a field outside the city's eastern limit, a stretch of scrubland that the Gotham Metropolitan Planning Commission had been meaning to develop for 20 years, and kept not getting to, which meant it served its current purpose admirably. Goku was in the middle of what appeared to be a kata, moving through combat sequences at a speed that suggested he was operating at perhaps 30% of his physical capacity while his ki cycled through patterns that Billy's magical awareness read like music, structured, purposeful, each movement drawing energy through his body and returning it refined. Billy landed 20 meters away, and Goku stopped immediately, turning with the instant situational awareness of someone whose nervous system treated the world as a continuous tactical map. They looked at each other. "You've got magic," Goku said. "You've got," Billy paused. His Shazam-enhanced wisdom trying to categorize what his magical awareness was reading. Something that feels like magic, but isn't. Key. It feels like the wizard's power. Before the word, I mean, like the source of it. Billy's expression was openly curious in the way that 16-year-old Billy was openly curious. The Shazam transformation amplifying his competence without eliminating his essential teenager. That doesn't happen. Usually things either feel magical or they don't. Constantine said it has a moral component, Goku offered. Like your emotional spectrum thing. The Lantern Core? Yeah. Billy processed this, his wisdom of Solomon working through the implications, with a speed that his math teachers would have found deeply unfair given his recent academic performance. So your energy and Shazam's power are compatible? Like they're drawing from similar sources, but through different frameworks? Maybe, Goku said. Then, with the directness that was apparently his primary mode of social interaction. You want to spar? Billy Batson, 16 years old, carrying the power of 6 gods, blinked. Batman said, Constantine stabilized the dimensional framework. I can push to intermediate forms. Batman said I shouldn't go to Ultra Instinct. But he didn't say I couldn't go Super. Scion. Goku's expression was the particular expression of someone who had found a technically accurate interpretation of a restriction and was comfortable with the ethics of this. I've been at minimal output for hours. I need to move. The wisdom of Solomon told Billy this was probably not what Batman had in mind. The courage of Achilles told him it sounded incredible. The courage of Achilles won. They started carefully, Billy at perhaps half capacity, Goku in base form. The scrubland field absorbing the initial exchanges with the patience of terrain that had never expected to be treated well. The first thing Billy noticed was the speed. Goku moved with an economy that was almost deceptive, each motion smaller than it needed to be, arriving at its destination through the shortest possible path. The second thing he noticed was the reading. Goku was continuously assessing every exchange, adding data that he processed and filed with the reflexive efficiency of someone who had sparred with literal gods and developed the habit of learning everything a fight could teach. Billy pushed to 70%, then 80. Goku went Super Saiyan. The golden light expanded across the scrubland, and the Shazam lightning responded. Billy's magical framework recognizing the key's harmonic frequency and resonating with it. Divine electricity, reaching toward golden energy with the instinctive attraction of compatible systems. The air between them crackled with something that was neither purely magical nor purely he but some third thing. A combination product of two power systems finding unexpected common ground. The exchange that followed lasted 6 minutes and 40 seconds. It would have been longer, but at the 4-minute mark, when Billy pushed to full capacity and Goku matched him, the resonance between their power systems produced a feedback loop that neither of them had anticipated. Shazam's divine lightning feeding into Goku's ki amplifying Shazam's magical framework. The combination escalating in a geometric progression that Billy's wisdom of Solomon calculated, approximately 3 seconds before it became a genuine problem, would level everything within a 2-kilometer radius if they didn't stop immediately. Stop, Billy said. Goku stopped. Instantly, completely, with the absolute physical control of someone who had spent decades learning to turn a star off with his nervous system. They stood in the aftermath, the feedback energy dissipating into the scrubland in waves of gold and white lightning. And Billy Batson said, with the particular shell-shocked clarity of someone who had just understood something significant. We can't spar. We can't. Our powers amplify each other. It's like two speakers facing each other. Goku considered this, breathing evenly despite what they'd just done. Feedback loop, he said. Yeah, that's actually really interesting. Batman is going to be so angry, Billy said. He was correct. Batman was. In the particular silent and absolutely contained way that Batman expressed anger, which was significantly more frightening than shouting. His message arrived on Billy's communicator 40 seconds later, which meant the Batcave's monitoring systems had logged the power spike immediately, and Batman had taken the remaining 39 seconds to compose a message that communicated maximum disapproval in minimum words. The message read, Fawcett City Scrubland. Power spike logged. Explain. Billy typed back. Accidental feedback loop. No damage. We're fine. Batman's response took 11 seconds. Then, Watchtower. 0800, both of you. Goku, reading over Billy's shoulder with the uninhibited curiosity of someone who had never developed a strong sense of personal space, said, he types like he talks. Yeah, Billy said, powering down to civilian form, the lightning returning him to a teenager in a too large hoodie, standing in a field of scorched scrubland at 9 o'clock at night. He does everything like he talks. Very efficiently. Very Batman. What neither of them noticed, because they had been somewhat occupied with not accidentally destroying a 2-kilometer radius. Was the figure watching from the tree line at the field's northern edge? Not Batman. Batman would have been closer and less visible. Not League surveillance. The signature was wrong. The figure was Mercy Graves, Lex Luthor's personal assistant and bodyguard, who had been observing the exchange. With a recording device of LexCorp's most sophisticated, manufacture and transmitting the footage in real time to a penthouse office at the top of LexCorp Tower. Luthor watched the feedback loop on a 60-inch display and felt the particular electric pleasure of a man who had just watched a hypothesis confirm itself beyond his most optimistic projections. Two power sources that amplified each other geometrically. A Shazam connection that provided magical framework integration. A fighter who operated on moral key, on the fundamental goodness of his own character translated into energy. Lex Luthor understood, with the cold precision of the most dangerous intellect on Earth, exactly how to corrupt a moral energy source. You didn't attack the energy. You attacked the morality. He reached for his phone and made two calls. The first was to a name that appeared in no public database. The second was to his personal scheduler, to arrange what he would describe, with characteristic audacity, as a friendly lunch. The Watchtower existed at a remove from the world that was more philosophical than physical. Yes. It orbited at 22,000 miles. Yes. The Earth below it was a blue suggestion rather than a place. Yes. The vacuum outside its reinforced walls was the particular, absolute silence that human beings had spent their entire evolutionary history being correctly afraid of. But the distance that mattered wasn't the altitude. It was the perspective. From the Watchtower, the Trinity had learned to see the world the way God saw it. Complete, continuous, comprehensible as a system. Every crisis simultaneously visible. Every thread a data point in a larger pattern. The problem with that perspective, Batman had noted in a file he kept, encrypted under 17 layers of security and had never shared with anyone, was that it made it very easy to forget that the people on the blue suggestion below were not data points. He thought about this occasionally. He thought about it now, standing at the Watchtower's main tactical display with Superman to his left and Wonder Woman to his right and Goku standing slightly apart from all three of them, looking at the Earth through the observation window with an expression that Batman couldn't immediately categorize. You've seen planets from space before, Batman said. It wasn't a question. The data on Goku's universe included interplanetary travel as routine. Yeah, Goku said. But not this one. He was quiet for a moment. It looks, I don't know, determined. Like, it decided to be alive, and nobody told it it had a choice. Superman heard this, and something in him shifted, the Kansas raised part. The part that had looked at this same view 10,000 times and felt the weight of it. The specific burden of loving something. So much that its vulnerability became your vulnerability. He looked at Goku with the careful attention of someone who was revising an assessment. Wonder Woman had requested the Watchtower meeting not primarily for the debrief, though the Fawcett City incident required documentation, but because she had spent the 36 hours since the harbor encounter thinking about Goku in the particular way she thought about warriors whose significance she hadn't yet fully understood. 3,000 years had given her a reliable instinct for the difference between power that passed through the world and power that changed it. Goku's key, she had concluded during a sleepless night in Themyscirus Embassy, was the latter, not because of its magnitude, though the magnitude was extraordinary, because of its quality, because Constantine had said it was clean, and in Diana's experience, genuinely clean power at that scale was rarer than any weapon. The debrief took 40 minutes. Batman presented the dimensional analysis, Constantine's ritual integration, the Fawcett City feedback data, the League members present, Flash, Green Lantern, Cyborg, Martian Manhunter, received it with varying degrees of the particular calibrated wariness that the Justice League had developed for unclassified variables after too many unclassified variables had turned out to be civilization-ending threats. Barry Allen was the first to speak after Batman finished. So the feedback loop between his key and Shazam's power is a structural feature, not an anomaly. Batman said, their energy systems are harmonically compatible. Together they amplify geometrically. Separately they're, a pause, manageable. Manageable, Hal Jordan repeated, with the tone of someone who found the word choice interesting. He was looking at Goku with the professional assessment of a man whose job was to police a sector of space containing 2,300 inhabited worlds, and whose ring had spent the past hour quietly attempting to measure Goku's willpower index and returning readings that the ring's analytical systems had classified, with unprecedented understatement, as substantial. The ring wants to know if you've ever been offered a lantern position. I don't know what that is, Goku said. Intergalactic Police Force. Powered by willpower. Hal held up his right hand, the ring's green light catching the Watchtower's illumination. The ring chooses its bearer based on the ability to overcome great fear. It's been trying to measure yours for the past hour, and it keeps. He checked the ring's display. It says your willpower index is beyond current scale parameters, which has never happened. I've been scared plenty of times, Goku said. And what do you do when you're scared? Fight harder. Hal Jordan looked at his ring. The ring looked back at him with the digital equivalent of a shrug. Yeah, Hal said. That's what we do too. John Johns had been silent through the debrief, his green features carrying the particular focused inwardness of a telepath, processing information at multiple levels simultaneously. He was not reading Goku's mind. The League had protocols about consent, and John honored them with the scrupulousness of someone who understood better than anyone what it meant to have your inner life accessible without permission, but the ambient psychic presence that any telepath registered involuntarily told him things that the debrief's data hadn't. Your grief, John said quietly during a pause in the discussion. For people you've lost, it's significant. Goku looked at him. Yeah, and it doesn't diminish the rest of it. The lightness. John's expression was thoughtful. Most beings with significant loss carry it as weight. Yours functions differently. Goku paused, apparently searching for language for something he'd never needed to articulate. The people I've lost would want me to keep going. Stopping to be sad about it doesn't help them. Protecting the people who are left does. He considered. Is that strange? No, John said, with the quiet authority of a man who was the last of his species and had chosen to continue living in service of others, rather than in memorial to what was gone. It is not strange at all. The philosophical moment was interrupted by Cyborg Systems logging, an alert that his mother box integration immediately flagged as priority. His eye's cybernetic component flared red. Boom tube signature, he said, his voice shifting into the clipped efficiency of threat response. Apocalypse origin. Upper atmosphere, 40 kilometers north-northeast. The Watchtower's alert systems activated simultaneously, amber to red. The tactical display, reconfiguring to show the bloom of apocalypse energy in the upper atmosphere with the particular lurid orange-red that mother box. Technology used to identify boom tube events. How many? Wonder Woman asked, already moving toward the equipment bay, reading 6 individual signatures. No, 8. Cyborg systems updated in real time. 12. They're staggered, sequential. This isn't an invasion formation. His expression shifted. It's a hunting party. Batman was already at the tactical display, pulling the signature analysis. Furies, he said. Specifically, Stampa, Mad Harriet, Lashina, Bernadette. He paused. And Kanto. Superman's jaw tightened. Kanto was Darkseid's master assassin, the new god of assassination, a being whose precision and lethality operated on a scale that made conventional threat assessment frameworks meaningless. His presence elevated a hunting party to something considerably more serious. They're here for me, Goku said. He had moved to the observation window and was watching the upper atmosphere with the calm attentiveness of someone reading a weather report. His key had shifted, not expanded, not elevated to combat levels, but reorganized, the way a musician might straighten in their chair before beginning to play. The drone that logged my signature in the harbor. Darkseid sent scouts. Darkseid doesn't send Kanto for scouts, Batman said. He sends Kanto to confirm whether something is worth his personal attention. So this is a test, Wonder Woman said. An audition, Batman corrected. He looked at Goku. Whatever you do in the next 20 minutes determines whether Darkseid considers you a curiosity or a threat. What's the difference? A curiosity he catalogs and files. A threat he addresses personally. Batman held Goku's gaze with the steady gray certainty of someone who had survived Darkseid's personal attention twice and found both experiences instructive. You do not want Darkseid's personal attention. Goku was quiet for a moment. Outside, in the upper atmosphere, the boom tube signatures were descending. The Furies moving in the particular tactical formation of hunters who expected their quarry to run. If I don't fight them, Goku said slowly, working through it, Darkseid thinks I'm hiding, which tells him I'm afraid of being assessed. Yes. And if I fight them at full capacity, Darkseid learns your ceiling, Batman said, which is information he will use. So I need to win without showing everything. Goku nodded slowly, the tactical logic clicking into place, with the ease of someone who had played this exact game against enemies, considerably more sophisticated than Apocalypse, though he chose not to say so, because the Watchtower's ambient tension didn't seem to need the complication. I can do that. There's a third option, Batman said, and the quality of his voice shifted, dropping half a register, acquiring the particular gravity that meant he was saying something he had already decided to say and was aware would be uncomfortable. You don't fight them at all. You let us handle it. Goku looked at him. Why? Because if Darkseid's Furies engage a Justice League response, that's expected. That's within the established framework. He knows our capabilities, our limits, our responses. A League defense of an unknown variable tells him the variable is under League protection, which tells him the League considers the variable significant, which tells him that you think I'm worth protecting, Goku said, which makes you valuable to him in a different way, Batman finished. Either way, Darkseid gets information. The question is which information costs us less. The room was quiet. Flash was vibrating slightly at the molecular level, his nervous system's response to threat proximity, the speed force making him constitutionally incapable of complete stillness when danger was near. Hal Jordan's ring was cycling through combat construct simulations. John was maintaining the careful psychic stillness of someone managing his own responses to the ambient tension. Goku looked at each of them in turn, with the quiet, methodical attention of someone building a picture. Then he looked back at Batman. You've been thinking about how to stop me, he said. Not accusing, observing. The same flat data point quality he'd used on Superman in the harbor since the beginning. That's why you wanted me in Gotham. That's why you asked Constantine to do the ritual, not just to stabilize the breach, but to understand how my energy works. You've been building a contingency. The Watchtower was very quiet. Batman said, yes. Okay, Goku said. Batman blinked. It was, for Batman, a significant physical response. Okay. If I turned bad, you'd need a way to stop me. That's smart. Goku's expression was utterly uncomplicated. The moral logic as clean as his key. I'm not going to turn bad. But you don't know that yet. So building the contingency is the right thing to do. He turned back to the observation window where the Furies were now, entering the upper stratosphere. I'll handle Kanto and the Furies. Not at full capacity. Enough to be impressive, not enough to show my ceiling. He glanced back once. And when this is done, you can keep working on the contingency. I won't make it harder for you. He was gone before Batman could respond. The Watchtower's emergency exit engaging. As Goku stepped through into the upper atmosphere with the casual ease of someone who had learned to breathe in vacuum 2 decades ago as a peripheral skill, Batman stood at the observation window and watched him go. After a long moment, Superman said, he knew the whole time. Yes, Batman said. And he's fine with it. Apparently, Superman watched Goku's golden form accelerating through the stratosphere toward the descending Furies with the particular focused brightness that Superman associated with beings who had genuinely, foundationally resolved the question of what they were for. Bruce, he said quietly, when was the last time someone found out about the contingency files and responded like that? Batman didn't answer. He was already updating the files. And the update he was making was the kind that required several minutes of careful thought, because it changed the fundamental category of what he was contingency planning for. Not a threat, not an asset, something rarer and more complicated than either. Outside, in the stratosphere, golden light met apocalypse orange, and the battle began. Kanto was, by any reasonable measure, the most elegant killer in the known universe. This was not hyperbole. The new god of assassination had spent millennia refining his craft to the point where violence had become indistinguishable from art. Each engagement, choreographed, each strike placed with the lapidary precision of someone who understood that the difference between a master and a practitioner was the elimination of everything unnecessary. He carried blades that existed, partly in the physical plane and partly in the dimensional space between matter and energy. And he moved through combat the way water moved through stone, not by force, but by finding the exact path of least resistance and following it with absolute commitment. He had killed new gods. He had killed monitors. He had killed beings whose names were carved into the source wall. He had never encountered anything like Goku. The stratosphere engagement lasted 11 minutes, and Kanto spent most of it experiencing the particular disorientation of a master craftsman whose fundamental assumptions about his craft were being systematically and cheerfully dismantled. He had arrived expecting a powerful but categorizable opponent, the apocalypse. Drone's data had been extensive, the key signature enormous. But enormous power was something Kanto had frameworks for. Power had patterns. Power had limits. Power, properly read, could be predicted and therefore countered. Goku's power had patterns, but they were the patterns of water, present everywhere, taking the shape of whatever contained them, finding paths that shouldn't exist. Kanto struck for predicted positions and found Goku had moved through the gap between prediction and arrival with a simplicity that was almost offensive. He deployed his dimensional blades and found them redirected not by force but by the precise minimum deflection required. Goku's hands moving, with the economy of someone who had fought enough master assassins to understand that responding to the blade was always less efficient than responding to the intent behind it. The furies were less subtle. Stampa's seismic boots activated in the stratosphere, which achieved nothing except producing an impressive shockwave that Goku moved through without apparent effort. Mad Harriet's energy claws found empty air consistently enough that she had progressed from tactical frustration to something approaching existential confusion. Lashina's steel whips wrapped twice around Goku's wrist, and he looked at them with the expression of someone who had been handed an interesting but ultimately manageable problem, then redirected the whip's energy back along its own length with a precise key pulse that sent Lashina spinning backward through 200 meters of stratosphere before she stabilized Bernadetha's foreign knife, which could incinerate the inner organs of beings who survived the blade itself. Opened a cut along Goku's left forearm. He felt it. He acknowledged it with a slight hiss of breath. He adjusted his defensive parameters to account for dimensional edge, weaponry, and did not get cut again. Through all of it, he stayed in base form. In the Watchtower, Batman watched the engagement with the focused attention of someone whose contingency document was being updated in real time. The data was illuminating in ways that his Batcave analysis hadn't been able to produce. Because Batcave analysis was theoretical and this was empirical, Goku under genuine combat pressure against new god-level opponents, moving through actual threat response rather than controlled demonstration. What Batman observed: reaction time operating below the threshold of conscious decision. Goku's body responding to threats before his eyes had fully registered them. The beginning of something that matched the Ultra Instinct description, not the full form. A shadow of it, running like background process beneath every exchange. Power output staying disciplined, never pushing above what the Furies required him to use. The ceiling remaining invisible. Tactical sophistication beyond anything the Apocalypse drone data had suggested. Goku was not just fighting the Furies. He was managing their formation, keeping them from achieving the specific geometric configuration that made New God Furies genuinely dangerous. Most significantly, he was letting Kanto see things. Not his true capability, but carefully selected demonstrations. A curated performance of impressive but bounded that told a specific story. Goku was feeding Darkseid's master assassin exactly the intelligence he wanted Darkseid to receive. Batman updated the contingency document again, changed the threat level assessment, added a note that read, with the quiet acknowledgement of someone who found genuine capability wherever it existed. Strategic intelligence significantly underestimated in initial assessment. Subject is not operating instinctively. Subject is playing a longer game. In the stratosphere, Goku caught Kanto's primary blade between two fingers. The new god of assassination went very still. They were close enough that the blade's dimensional edge was a centimeter from Goku's eye. Close enough that Kanto could see what was in that eye. Not fear, not triumph, not the cold absence of emotion that Kanto associated with beings who had killed enough to stop feeling it. Just attention. Complete, genuine, utterly undramatic attention. The look of someone who was fully present in this moment and found it. On balance, interesting. You're really good, Goku said, and meant it completely. Kanto, who had received many things from opponents at close quarters, had never received a sincere compliment. He had no framework for it. His response took 2 full seconds, which was, for a new god assassin, essentially geological time. You are not what the drone's data suggested, Kanto said, his voice carrying the particular toneless quality of someone from whom all unnecessary expression had been refined away over millennia. Probably not, Goku agreed. Tell Darkseid. He paused, apparently considering. Tell him I said hi, and that if he wants to know what I'm actually capable of, he should come himself. A beat. That's not a threat. I just think it'd be more interesting. Kanto studied him for 3 seconds with eyes that had read the last moments of 10,000 opponents, and found them all ultimately legible. He could not read Goku. He found this. The word his ancient assassin's mind produced was remarkable. He retrieved his blade. He signaled the Furies. Withdrawal with a gesture so economical. It was almost invisible, and he departed through a boom tube that closed behind him like a curtain being drawn, taking the Furies and the apocalypse, hunting party back to a dark world orbiting a dying star, carrying intelligence that would reach Darkseid's ears within the hour. Goku floated in the stratosphere afterward, watching the boom tube's afterimage fade. The cut on his forearm was already closing. Psion physiology handling the dimensional wound more slowly than a standard injury, but handling it nonetheless. He flexed the arm experimentally, felt the healing progress, filed it under dimensional edge. Weapons require additional defensive calibration, and moved on. He became aware, slowly, of a presence nearby. Not the Watchtower, further away, positioned in the middle, distance with the particular stillness of someone who had been watching for some time and was not especially concerned about being noticed. The figure was humanoid, seated cross-legged in vacuum with the comfort of someone for whom the absence of atmosphere was a matter of complete indifference, wearing a strange chair-like device that moved with him through space, its surfaces covered in circuitry that pulsed with the slow rhythm of something that was thinking, rather than processing. The figure's face was unreadable, ageless in the way of beings who had existed long enough that age had simply stopped being a relevant variable. Goku looked at him. You've been there a while. Since your arrival in the harbor, Metron said. His voice carried no atmosphere to travel through and arrived in Goku's ears through methods that bypassed the requirement for medium. I observe. It is my function and my preference. What have you observed? A being of extraordinary capability choosing, repeatedly and without apparent conflict, to operate below that capability for the benefit of others. Metron's eyes, ancient, curious, carrying the particular quality of intelligence that had long since moved past judgment into pure observation, moved across Goku with the methodical attention of a cataloger. In my experience, beings who choose limitation rather than having it imposed are rare. Beings who choose it cheerfully are functionally unique. It's not limitation, Goku said. It's just appropriate. You don't use everything you have for every situation. That's wasteful. And it means you stop paying attention, because nothing's challenging anymore. Metron was quiet for a moment. The Mobius chair cycled through a pattern of calculations so rapid that even Goku's psion perception couldn't follow it. You are aware, Metron said, that your arrival has attracted attention beyond Apocalypse. Batman mentioned Darkseid. Darkseid is one vector. There are others. Metron's chair drifted slightly in the vacuum, a movement that suggested thought rather than navigation. The source wall registered your key at the moment of breach. What exists beyond the source wall? What has always existed beyond the source wall? is not indifferent to signatures of this quality. Goku felt something in the stratospheres. Silence that hadn't been there a moment before. Not a presence exactly. An awareness. The specific psychic quality of being observed by something that existed at a scale that made Apocalypse look like a neighborhood dispute. Who's beyond the source wall, he asked. Metron looked at him with the expression of someone who possessed knowledge and had learned over an extremely long existence that providing it in its entirety was rarely beneficial and occasionally catastrophic. That, he said, is a question whose answer you are not yet equipped to act on. When you are, the answer will be evident. He paused. What I can tell you is this. Your energy resonates with something older than new gods, older than the multiverse's current configuration. The key you carry, its moral component, its orientation toward life, is recognized by forces that predate Apocalypse and New Genesis both. Is that good? Goku asked. It is significant, Metron said, which was not the same thing, and both of them understood the distinction. The Mobius chair's circuits pulsed once, decisively. There is something else. He produced, from a compartment in the chair that Goku's eyes hadn't tracked, a small object, a disk of material that was neither metal nor stone, covered in markings that weren't quite any writing system Goku had encountered, warm to the electromagnetic sense even at distance. This was found in the Netherrealm pocket dimension, in the arena. After your departure, Goku reached out and took it. The moment his fingers touched it, his ki responded, a pulse of recognition, like hearing a word in a foreign language that happened to share a root with something familiar. What is it? A summoning seal, Metron said. Old enough to predate Shang Tsung's involvement with the Netherrealm by several thousand years. It was placed in that arena deliberately before your arrival, which means someone knew you were coming. Before the breach occurred, the Mobius chair began its departure, Metron receding into the vacuum with the measured calm of someone who had delivered what he came to deliver and had other observations to attend to. The question worth asking, Son Goku, is not what you are doing in this universe. He was almost gone. The question is who arranged for you to be here. The stratosphere was empty except for Goku, and the seal in his hand, and the slow turning of the earth below, determined and alive. 36,000 kilometers of life and noise and desperate hope, completely unaware that something had just looked at it from beyond the edge of everything and found the particular small golden figure floating above it. Interesting. Goku looked at the seal. He looked at the earth. He thought about Chi-Chi, who was definitely angry by now. He thought about Vegeta, who would be insufferable about this. He closed his hand around the seal and descended. Amanda Waller did not believe in accidents. This was not paranoia, or rather, it was the specific kind of paranoia that stopped being paranoia when your professional history included enough confirmed conspiracies to fill a filing cabinet that she kept in a vault, beneath a building whose address appeared on no public record. She believed in causes and effects and the chains between them, and she believed that the appropriate response to a cause you didn't understand was to locate the chain and follow it until you found something you could use. Son Goku had arrived in Metropolis's harbor through a dimensional breach caused by his own energy, interacting with a weakness in Prime Earth's dimensional fabric. That was the Justice League's explanation. That was Constantine's explanation. That was the explanation Batman had filed in the League's shared intelligence database, which Waller accessed through back channels that Bruce Wayne would be furious to know existed and that she maintained with the patient professionalism of someone who understood that information was the only currency that never devalued. Waller had read the explanation. She had noted the summoning seal detail, which Batman had included in the file with characteristic thoroughness, and she had spent 48 hours following a chain that the Justice League, focused on the immediate tactical situation, hadn't yet picked up. The chain led to a name. The name led to a location. The location was a research facility in the Nevada desert that appeared on no public record and whose power consumption, routed through 17 shell companies, Waller's financial analysts, had traced to a source that made her set down her coffee cup with the careful deliberateness of someone who didn't want to betray reaction. LexCorp's black budget division. She did not call Batman. She did not alert the Justice League. She activated Task Force X. Goku became aware of the extraction team at 4 in the morning, in the Wayne Manor guest room that Alfred had prepared with the quiet efficiency of someone who found unusual house guests entirely within the normal parameters of his professional life. He was not asleep. Science didn't require much sleep, and his mind had been moving through the problem of the summoning seal with the focused persistence of someone who had learned to treat mysteries as training problems, apply pressure, find the weak point, push through. He felt them before he heard them. 12 distinct life signatures, approaching the manor's eastern perimeter, moving with the disciplined precision of professionals, their intent carrying the particular psychic weight that Goku's key sensitivity registered as neither hostile nor friendly, but transactional. They wanted something, and they were prepared to be efficient about getting it. He was on the manor's east lawn when they arrived, standing in the dark in the borrowed Wayne Manor guest clothes Alfred had laid out, which were Bruce Wayne's, and therefore fit approximately the way a suit of armor fits a person who wasn't measured for it, hands in his pockets. Watching the tree line, the team leader stepped out of the shadows, and Goku read her immediately. Military bearing carrying civilian authority, the specific posture of someone who had learned to give orders in contexts where the orders were the only thing standing between acceptable outcomes and catastrophic ones. She was not large, and she was not armed with anything visible, and she was. Goku's key sensitivity told him with quiet certainty, the most dangerous person in the immediate vicinity. Not because of what she could do physically, because of what she had already decided to do before she arrived. Son Goku, Amanda Waller said, I'm going to need about an hour of your time. Does Batman know you're here? No. Should I tell him? Waller's expression didn't change, which was itself an answer. That's your choice. I'm here because I have information you need, and because I want something in return. She held up a tablet, the screen showing a satellite image of the Nevada facility, then a financial chain, then a name. Lex Luthor has been watching you since the harbor. He's not watching because he's curious. He's watching because he's identified a vector. Goku looked at the tablet. A vector for what? Your key has a moral component. Constantine documented it. The League filed it. And Luthor accessed the file through methods I won't bore you with. Waller lowered the tablet. Luthor's black budget division has been working on a specific problem for 3 years. How to corrupt the emotional spectrums while frequency. Green Lantern's power source. He's never solved it because willpower, as a power source, is too diffuse. It's collective, distributed across thousands of ring bearers. There's no single point of failure. She let the silence work for a moment. Your key isn't diffuse, she continued. It's singular. It comes from you, your character, your choices, your fundamental moral orientation, which means it has a single point of failure. She met his eyes with the flat, assessing directness of someone who had delivered bad news to people far more powerful than herself, and found the experience instructive. Luthor isn't going to attack you. He's going to arrange a situation. That makes you make a choice that compromises your character. And when your key reflects that compromise, when the moral component degrades, his technology can amplify the degradation. Goku was quiet. The pre-dawn darkness settled around them. Wayne Manors, ancient stones breathing the particular patience of a building that had witnessed generations of impossible things. What does he want the corrupted key for? Goku asked. Same thing he always wants things for, Waller said. Leverage. Over the League. Over Superman specifically. A pause. A morally compromised version of your power, amplified and weaponized, would give him something he's never had. A counter to Kryptonian solar absorption that operates at the key level rather than the physical. It would make Superman's goodness, his fundamental moral character, a liability. By showing it can be corrupted, Goku said slowly. By showing that anyone's can. Even someone the League has started to trust. Waller put the tablet away. Luthor's lunch invitation arrives tomorrow morning. I'd be very surprised if you haven't already received notification. Goku had. Alfred had passed it. Along the previous evening with the particular diplomatic neutrality of a man who communicated everything. Through what he didn't say. A handwritten note on LexCorp's stationery. Gracious and warm and carrying no visible threat. Inviting Goku to lunch at Luthor's Metropolis penthouse to discuss, as Luthor had phrased it, the particular challenges of being extraordinary. in a world that doesn't always know what to do with extraordinary people. What do you want in return? Goku asked. Waller looked at him with the specific expression of someone who had decided, after careful deliberation, to be direct because directness was more efficient than the alternative. I want you to go to the lunch, she said, and I want you to wear a monitoring device that will give my analysts access to whatever Luthor reveals about his research program. A beat. Batman will eventually find the Nevada facility, but eventually isn't now, and Luthor's timeline is shorter than the League realizes. I need the research data before he burns the facility. You want me to spy for you? I want you to have lunch with a man who is planning to weaponize your soul, Waller said, while giving me the information I need to prevent that from happening. The monitoring is incidental, is it? The question landed between them with a weight that Waller acknowledged, with a fractional shift in her expression, not guilt. Because Amanda, Waller had processed guilt into something more functional a long time ago. But recognition. The recognition of someone who had been accurately read. No, she said. It's not incidental. I want the research data for Task Force X's counter-metahuman program. That's also true. She held his gaze. I'm not going to pretend. Otherwise, because I don't think you'd respect it if I did. Goku looked at her for a long moment. His key was very quiet, not suppressed, just still. The particular stillness of someone thinking carefully rather than acting. I'll go to the lunch, he said. I won't wear the monitoring device. Waller's jaw tightened fractionally. But, Goku continued, if I find out anything that's genuinely dangerous, not useful to you, dangerous to people, I'll tell Batman directly. Not you. He met her eyes with the uncomplicated directness that was beginning to be his most consistent quality. You're trying to protect people. I get that. But the way you're trying to do it, he paused, finding the language, it treats people like pieces, including me. I'm not a piece. Everyone is a piece, Waller said. That's not cynicism. That's how large-scale threat management works. Maybe, Goku said, but I've beaten people who thought that way. Most of them. He said it without aggression, as pure data. Point. The ones who thought people were pieces always had a blind spot, because the pieces kept surprising them. Waller studied him in the pre-dawn dark with the thorough, unsentimental attention she gave to every variable she encountered. She had expected resistance. She had prepared for negotiation. She had not prepared for the specific quality of Goku's refusal, which was not hostile, not naive, not the principled posturing of a hero performing heroism for an audience. It was the refusal of someone who had developed a coherent philosophy through decades of experience and applied it consistently regardless of context. She found it, against every professional instinct, somewhat impressive. Batman will find the facility within 72 hours, she said. When he does, the research data will be gone. She turned to leave, her extraction team materializing from the shadows with practiced efficiency. I hope your lunch is informative. She was almost to the tree line when Goku said, Waller. She stopped. The summoning seal, he said. Metron told me someone placed it before I arrived. Someone who knew I was coming. He held her gaze across the lawn's dark distance. Did you know about it? The pause that followed was very brief, a fraction of a second, barely perceptible. But Goku's key sensitivity caught it the way a seismograph catches a tremor. The specific psychic quality of someone deciding, in real time, between two versions of the truth. No, Waller said. But I know who did. She walked into the tree line and was gone. Goku stood on the east lawn as the pre-dawn sky began. Its slow negotiation toward morning. Wayne Manor at his back, the summoning seal warm in his closed fist. The earth's particular determined. Aliveness pressing up through the soles of his feet. He thought about pieces. He thought about Luthor's lunch invitation. Handwritten and gracious, waiting on the guest room's writing desk. He thought about what it meant to have a soul that was also a weapon, and whether knowing that changed anything about how you used it. Above him, in a communications satellite whose trajectory had been subtly adjusted by systems that bore no LexCorp fingerprint, but whose algorithmic signature Cyborg would eventually identify and trace. A camera drone was recording the east lawn with the patient thoroughness of someone who had anticipated this exact conversation and found its outcome. Goku's refusal of Waller's device. His decision to attend the lunch independently. Precisely what they had engineered it to be. Lex Luthor, watching the feed on a 60-inch display in his Metropolis penthouse. Set down his scotch. Good, he said, to no one. Then, because he was Lex Luthor and precision mattered, better than good. He picked up his phone and made a call to the Nevada facility. Accelerate the timeline, he said. Our guest is coming to lunch. The lunch was served at noon on the 73rd floor of LexCorp Tower, in a dining room whose floor-to-ceiling windows provided an unobstructed view of Metropolis that was, Goku recognized, itself a statement, a reminder of scale, of perspective, of the difference between the city as lived experience and the city as managed system. The food was extraordinary. Alfred had prepared Goku for this with the dry specificity of someone who had attended enough Luthor events to have developed opinions. The cuisine will be impeccable. The conversation will be precise. And everything on the table, including the cutlery, will be sending you a message. Pay attention to the messages, sir. Luthor was already seated when Goku arrived, which was also a statement. The host's deliberate choice to be found rather than to receive. Communicating comfort rather than ceremony. The specific social grammar of someone who wanted you to feel you'd walked into his living room rather than his arena. He rose when Goku entered, hand extended, smile carrying the particular quality of warmth that was architecturally indistinguishable from genuine warmth unless you knew what genuine warmth felt like at the key level. Goku knew what it felt like. Luthor's wasn't. Son Goku, Luthor said, with the careful pronunciation of someone who had practiced. I'm grateful you came. Thanks for the invitation, Goku said, and sat down, and immediately ate a bread roll because he was a scion and the bread was there. Luthor watched this with an expression that managed the considerable achievement of being simultaneously charmed and recalibrating. I understand you've had an eventful few days. Pretty eventful. Yeah. Goku looked at him across the table with the same uncomplicated attention he gave. Everything, not suspicious, not performing unsuspicion, just present. You've been watching me since the harbor. Luthor paused for precisely the right amount of time, long enough to acknowledge the directness, short enough to avoid appearing caught. I monitor anomalous energy signatures as a matter of standard security protocol. Metropolis is my city in a very real sense. I have obligations. You accessed the League's intelligence file through back channels, Goku said. You identified my key's moral component as a vulnerability. You've been running a research program for 3 years on corrupting the emotional spectrums will frequency, and you think my key gives you a single point of failure, that the lantern cord doesn't. He reached for another bread roll. You're going to try to make me compromise my character so your technology can amplify the degradation. The dining room was very quiet. Luthor set down his wine glass with the measured care of someone managing a significant recalibration while maintaining complete surface composure. It was, Goku's key reading told him, a genuinely impressive performance, the psychic signature of a man experiencing substantial surprise contained within the physical presentation of mild amusement. You've been briefed, Luthor said. Yeah. By whom? Does it matter? Luthor considered this. No, he said, after a moment. I suppose it doesn't change the fundamental situation. He leaned back slightly, the body language shifting from social warmth to something more honest. The posture of a man who had decided that the prepared approach was unavailable and was moving to improvisation with the fluid confidence of someone who trusted his improvisation more than his preparation. You're not afraid of me. Should I be? Most people with your level of power are afraid of me, Luthor said, because most people with your level of power understand that physical capability has limits and that the right information, properly applied, can neutralize almost anything. He met Goku's eyes with the direct, unsentimental gaze of someone offering a genuine assessment rather than a performance of one. You came to this lunch knowing what I intended, which means either you're very confident or very naive. Which do you think? Luthor looked at him for a long moment, the analytical gaze of the most dangerous intellect on Earth, reading Goku the way he read everything, as a system to be understood and therefore managed. What he found in Goku's face was what Kanto had found in the stratosphere, and what Batman had found in the Batcave, and what everyone who looked at Goku carefully enough eventually found. A person who was exactly what they appeared to be, without remainder. No hidden agenda. No performance. No gap between presentation and interior. It was, Luthor found, the most unsettling thing he had encountered in decades. Neither, Luthor said quietly. I think you're something I don't have a category for. He picked up his wine glass again. Which means I should probably explain myself. You don't have to. I want to. And Goku's key reading caught. Beneath the precision and the composure. Something that surprised him. Luthor meant it. Not entirely. There were layers. There were always layers with Luthor. But the desire to explain himself was genuine. Carrying the specific, psychic weight of a man who had made peace with his own villainy by constructing an elaborate philosophical architecture around it and occasionally, desperately, wanted someone to understand the architecture. Superman is an alien. He came to this planet with godlike power and the moral framework of a Kansas farm, and the entire world loves him for it. And I don't doubt his intentions. I never have. What I doubt is the precedent. The precedent, Goku repeated. A being of unlimited power operating on personal moral judgment, accountable to no one, because his personal moral judgment has been, so far, acceptable. Luthor's voice carried the flat conviction of a man who had rehearsed this argument long enough to have worn the rehearsal away and arrived at what he actually believed. My research isn't about destroying Superman. It's about demonstrating that his power has a failure mode. That goodness, at that scale, is not a permanent condition. That the world needs contingencies. A pause. Your key proves my thesis. A power source built entirely on moral character. Beautiful. And completely, structurally vulnerable to moral compromise. So you were going to compromise mine, Goku said. To prove the point. I was going to demonstrate the vulnerability, Luthor said. Yes. Goku ate another bread roll. He was quiet for a moment, looking at Metropolis. Through the floor to ceiling. Windows, the city sprawling below them. Alive and noisy and full of the particular, desperate determination that cities generated. When enough people decided, simultaneously, to keep going. You're not wrong, he said. Luthor blinked. I have been compromised before, Goku continued. There are techniques, in my universe. There are ways to corrupt ki, to redirect it, to use someone's power against them. And yeah, it's worked on me. More than once. He met Luthor's eyes steadily. But here's the thing about a power source built on moral character. When you compromise it, you don't get a weapon. You get a warning. Because the person it belongs to knows immediately when it's happening. Because they can feel themselves becoming something they don't want to be. He paused. And then they fix it. Not always, Luthor said. Superman's injustice incarnation stopped feeling it, Goku said. That's the difference. He stopped paying attention to what he was becoming because the power was easier than the feeling. He looked at Luthor directly. I pay attention. It's the most important training I ever did. Harder than any physical form. The silence between them carried a different quality now, not the tactical silence of two parties, managing a negotiation, but something rarer and more uncomfortable. The silence of a genuinely surprising conversation. Then every window in the 73rd floor simultaneously cracked. Not broke, cracked. A precise geometric fracture pattern propagating across all 16 panels. Simultaneously, the building's structure absorbing a pressure wave that had arrived from directly above, with the particular signature that every monitoring system in Metropolis immediately classified as apocalypse energy. Goku was at the window before the cracks finished forming, ki expanding outward as his senses swept the sky above Metropolis with the rapid thoroughness of someone who had spent decades learning to read a battlefield. In the first second of a threat, what he read was not Darkseid's furies. What he read was Darkseid. The Lord of Apocalypse descended through Metropolis's upper atmosphere, with the particular quality of presence that separated genuine cosmic power from everything that merely pretended to it, a gravity that was not physical, a wrongness in the air that every living thing in the city below registered as primal threat, the specific existential pressure of something that had decided, deliberately and without urgency, that it was time to attend to a matter personally. Goku had invited this. He had told Kanto to tell Darkseid to come himself. He had not, in the honest privacy of his own assessment, been entirely certain Darkseid would. Darkseid's Omega beams hit the Lex Corp Tower's upper facade as a greeting, not aimed at Goku. Aimed at the building, a statement of scale, of casual destructive capacity, of the specific arrogance, of someone who destroyed things to illustrate that destruction was trivial. The 73rd floor shook. Luthor was thrown sideways and caught himself on the dining table with the reflexive physical capability of a man who maintained peak human condition for exactly these contingencies. Goku went through the cracked window. The glass barely touched him. The battle that followed over Metropolis lasted 23 minutes and was witnessed by approximately 4 million people, many of whom recorded it, all of whom would spend considerable time afterward trying to find language for what they had seen. The Justice League scrambled from the Watchtower, Superman arriving first, then Wonder Woman, then the rest, but by the time they reached the engagement coordinates, the terms of the battle had already been set. Darkseid did not fight the way Kanto fought, or the way the Furies fought. He did not fight the way any being Goku had encountered in DC's universe fought. His combat style was the expression of someone for whom victory was not an outcome but a premise. He moved through engagement, the way the laws of physics move through matter, not adapting to resistance, but simply continuing. Because continuity was his nature and resistance was a temporary condition. The Omega beams came without warning, not from his eyes, as Goku had expected, but from a geometric pattern that Darkseid constructed in the space around Goku, surrounding him in a three-dimensional lattice of Omega, energy that closed simultaneously. From every direction, Goku went Super Saiyan Blue. The dimensional framework groaned. Batman's Watchtower display showed the Prime Earth. Stress fractures reopening, wider this time. The integration Constantine had performed holding but straining. The fractures propagating along fault lines that hadn't existed before. Goku pushed this high. The golden blue light of Super Saiyan Blue filled Metropolis's sky with something that was neither sunrise nor lightning, but partook of both. And the Omega lattice met it. And the meeting produced an energy release that shattered every unprotected window within 2 kilometers. The fractures in reality spread. Goku felt them, felt the dimensional framework flexing around his output. Reality making room for him the hard way, the breach mechanics Constantine had explained playing out in real time at city scale. He could push higher. Ultra Instinct would end this, would end Darkseid, or at least this engagement, in a time frame measured in seconds rather than minutes. And it would break Metropolis. Not metaphorically. The dimensional fractures, at Ultra Instinct output, would propagate to full breach. The city would experience what the harbor had experienced, multiplied by the scale differential between a harbor and a city. Buildings, people, the blue suggestion of the earth below, with all its noise and determination and desperate hope. He held at Super Saiyan Blue. Darkseid's Omega beams tracked him through 17 evasions, each one closer than the last. The beams tracking intelligence, learning his movement patterns, with the adaptive efficiency of technology that had been optimizing for 10,000 years. The 18th beam connected. The Omega sanction hit Goku like the end of a sentence, not an explosion, not a physical impact, but a reality edit, a rewriting of the local framework to remove the object it was aimed at. Goku felt himself being unmade at the molecular level, his ki flaring desperately against the dissolution. And for one full second, he was genuinely, completely, foundationally afraid. Not of dying. He had died before. Dying was manageable. He was afraid of being unmade. Of the ki, the decades of training, the relationships, the choices that had built him, being dissolved into the Omega. Sanctions cold accounting. The fear lasted 1 second. Then it became something else. Not anger. Anger was too simple, too available, too much the response of someone reacting rather than acting. What it became was clarity, the particular focused totality of someone who had spent their entire life learning to be present in the moment of greatest pressure and had finally, in this universe of gods and shadows, found a moment that required everything they had ever learned. His ki did not expand. It condensed, drew inward to a single point of absolute concentration. Every transformation, every form, every decade of training collapsing into a density that was not power, but the thing that power came from, the essential, undiluted character of Son Goku, distilled to its core. The Omega Sanction met it, and the Omega Sanction stopped. Not dispersed, not deflected, stopped, held at the boundary of Goku's condensed ki like a wave against a seawall. The dissolution unable to find purchase because there was nothing to dissolve that wasn't absolutely, completely itself. Darkseid looked at the stopped Omega Sanction with the expression of someone who had seen a mathematical proof to challenge reality, and found reality had written a different proof that reached the same answer through a method he had never considered. He looked at Goku. Goku, holding the condensed ki at the edge of something that wasn't quite ultra instinct, but was the nearest approach to it that didn't crack the world, looked back. I'm not going to break the city, Goku said, and his voice in this state carried the particular resonance of something that was simply, completely true. I could push higher. You know I could. But there are 4 million people down there, and the dimensional framework can't hold it. He held Darkseid's gaze with the steady attention of someone who was not performing courage, but simply being it. So we're going to stop here, and you're going to know that I held back, and you're going to know why. Darkseid was still. That's not weakness, Goku said. It's the opposite of weakness, and I think you know that. The Lord of Apocalypse, who had encountered 10,000 warriors across 10,000 worlds and found them all ultimately comprehensible, stood in Metropolis's sky above 4 million people and looked at the thing that had stopped his Omega Sanction with nothing but the concentration of its own essential nature, and felt something he experienced so rarely that his ancient neural architecture had to search through millennia of memory to identify it. Recognition, not of an equal. Darkseid did not believe in equals, but of something that operated according to principles his own anti-life philosophy had spent eternity defining itself against. Hope as a force, not the fragile, conditional hope of beings who hoped because they were afraid to despair, but hope as fundamental orientation, as structural feature, as the load-bearing wall of a person's entire existence. He departed without a word. The boom tube that opened and swallowed him was not retreat. Darkseid did not retreat. It was assessment, the withdrawal of someone who had learned something significant and needed to determine what it meant before proceeding. Goku descended through Metropolis's damaged air, Super Saiyan Blue fading as he released the condensed ki back to its normal distribution. The dimensional fractures in Batman's display closing slowly, the framework settling back toward stability with the exhausted relief of something that had been pushed to its limit and found the limit had held. Superman caught him at the 200-meter mark, hands on his shoulders, face carrying the particular expression of someone who had watched the Omega Sanction stop and was still processing the physics of it. You're bleeding, Superman said. The cut on Goku's forearm from Bernadette's far knife had reopened under the Omega Sanction's pressure. There were other injuries, rib stress from the energy impact, the particular cellular fatigue of pushing Super Saiyan Blue against Darkseid-level opposition without resolution. Nothing critical, nothing that Saiyan physiology wouldn't address within hours. I'm fine, Goku said, which was technically accurate in the way that statements made by people who had just stopped an Omega Sanction through sheer force of character were technically accurate. Did anyone get hurt? In the city? Minor injuries from the window shatter radius, Cyborg reported through the comm. No fatalities. You kept the engagement high enough. Goku exhaled. The relief in it was complete and unguarded. You held back, Wonder Woman said, arriving alongside Superman, her eyes on him with the 3,000-year warrior's gaze that had never quite turned off since the harbor. Against Darkseid. At the moment, it would have mattered most. The city, Goku said simply. Diana looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, with the quiet weight of someone who did not give this particular acknowledgement easily, in all my years, I have met very few warriors who understood that restraint at full power is harder than release. She paused. You are one of them. Above them, in the damaged Metropolis sky, the dimensional fractures continued their slow closure. Below them, in the LexCorp Tower's 73rd floor, Lex Luthor stood at his cracked windows and looked at the space where the battle had been, and his expression was unreadable in a way that was different from his usual unreadability, not controlled, but genuinely uncertain. The face of a man whose thesis had been tested and who was not entirely sure what result. The test had returned, and in the Nevada desert, in a research facility that Batman's monitoring systems had been quietly closing in on for 71 of the 72 hours. Waller had predicted a server farm containing 3 years of emotional spectrum corruption research quietly, completely, without any fingerprint that any forensic system would ever fully explain, erased itself. 3 days after the battle over Metropolis, the Justice League held a formal session in the Watchtower that was not technically about Goku, in the way that most Justice League formal sessions were not technically about the thing they were actually about. It was listed on the Watchtower's agenda as Dimensional Breach Assessment and Ongoing Monitoring Protocol Review. Batman had written the agenda. Batman always wrote the agenda. The agenda always said something other than what the meeting was for, because Batman understood that the formal record of a meeting shaped how its conclusions were remembered, and he preferred conclusions to arrive without the weight of their own precedent. What the meeting was actually about. What to do with Son Goku. Goku was not present for the first 40 minutes, which was also Batman's preference. He had asked Goku to wait in the Watchtower's secondary observation deck while the League conducted its preliminary discussion, and Goku had agreed with the uncomplicated directness that had become his most consistent characteristic in their interactions. He had taken a protein bar from Alfred's carefully packed provisions and gone to watch the Earth and was, when Batman's hidden observation system briefly checked, sitting cross-legged on the observation deck's floor, with his eyes closed and his key cycling, in the slow meditative pattern that Constantine had identified as his baseline maintenance state. He was not listening through the wall. Batman had checked for that too. The preliminary discussion covered the expected ground. Flash made the case for full League membership with the optimistic efficiency of someone who had already decided and was now providing arguments for the record. Green Lantern noted that the Ring's willpower assessment remained beyond scale parameters, and that OA's Guardian Council had transmitted a formal inquiry about the unclassified power signature that was still, 3 days later, making certain Lantern Corps monitoring systems behave oddly. Cyborg had run the dimensional fracture data through every modeling system available and returned a finding that he presented with the careful precision of someone who understood its implications. At Super Scion Blue output sustained over the 23-minute Darkseid engagement, the Prime Earth framework had held. At Ultra Instinct, the models projected total framework failure within 90 seconds of activation. He knew that, Wonder Woman said when Cyborg finished. Before the battle, he made the calculation in real time and held the ceiling. That's not the point, Batman said. Then what is the point? Superman asked, with the particular patience of someone who had been in enough Batman meetings to understand that the point was always further along than it appeared. The point, Batman said, pulling up the contingency document on the main display, the full document, not the summary, the one he had been updating since the harbor, is that in 72 hours, Son Goku has stopped an Omega sanction through force of character, identified Luthor's research program independently, declined Amanda Waller's monitoring request on principled grounds, allowed me to build a containment contingency without obstruction, and held his power ceiling against Darkseid to protect a city he arrived in 3 days ago. He paused. And I still don't know how to stop him if he goes to Ultra Instinct. The room was quiet. Bruce, Superman said carefully. Is that a problem? It's always a problem, Batman said. It's a problem with you. It's a problem with Diana. It's a problem with every being of this power scale that operates in this universe. He closed the contingency document. The difference is that with every other being of this power scale, I have had years to develop the contingency. I have had weeks with him. He looked at the closed document for a moment. And the contingency I've developed is incomplete, which means if I'm wrong about his character, we have a problem I can't solve. You're not wrong about his character, John said quietly from the far end of the table. The Martian Manhunter had been silent through most of the discussion, his green features carrying the inward focus of a telepath, processing information at multiple levels. I have not read his mind. He has not consented, and I would not without consent. But 48 hours of ambient psychic contact provides data that I find. He paused. choosing the word with the care of. Someone who understood that precision mattered, unambiguous. His moral framework is not performed. It is structural. It is what he is built from. Moral frameworks can be compromised, Batman said. Yes, John agreed. So can yours. So can Clark's. So can Diana's. He met Batman's eyes steadily. We operate on trust because the alternative is paralysis. We always have. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man confronting an argument he had made to himself many times and not yet fully resolved. Batman reached forward and activated the intercom to the secondary observation deck. Goku, we're ready for you. He arrived the way he always arrived, without theater, slightly rumpled, carrying the protein bar he apparently hadn't finished. He sat in the chair they'd placed at the table's end and looked around at the assembled league with the open, uncomplicated attention that Batman had spent 3 days trying to find the seam in and had not found. I want to ask you something, Superman said, before the formal discussion could begin. Not for the record, just as Clark. He leaned forward slightly. The farm boy earnestness that no amount of Godhood had managed to fully institutionalize. What do you actually want? Not from the League, not from the dimensional situation. You. What do you want? Goku thought about this with the genuine consideration of someone who found the question interesting rather than rhetorical. I want to go home, he said. Chi-Chi is definitely angry and my kids are. I have things to get back to. He paused. But I can't go home until Constantine figures out how to stabilize a return breach without propagating the dimensional fractures, which he says will take at least another week, maybe 2. And until then? Diana asked. Until then. He looked at the Earth through the Watchtower's observation panels. The blue suggestion of it, its noise and determination, visible even at this distance as a quality of the light it reflected. I want to be useful. There are things happening here that I can help with. The Netherrealm seal, whoever placed it, whoever knew I was coming, that needs to be understood. The Nevada facility data erased itself before Batman's team got there, which means someone with very sophisticated access did it, and that person is still. He glanced at Batman, somewhere in the chain. Batman's expression shifted fractionally. You know who erased the facility. I have a guess, Goku said, but it's just a guess. Share it. After the meeting, he held Batman's gaze with the easy confidence of someone who had spent 3 days watching how Batman operated and had decided that directness was the only language worth using with him. I'll tell you everything I know and everything I suspect, and I won't hold anything back. But I want to say something first to all of you. He looked around the table, Flash's open warmth, Hal Jordan's calibrated assessment, Cyborg's patient technical attention, John S.'s ancient quiet, Diana's warrior focus, Superman's earnest presence, and Batman's careful, contained, perpetually updating intelligence. I know what this meeting is actually about, he said, and I know Batman has a contingency document with my name on it that he hasn't solved yet. I know the dimensional framework can't hold Ultra Instinct, and I know that's a genuine problem for this universe's stability. He paused. I'm not asking you to trust me. Trust is earned, not requested. I'm asking you to let me spend the next 2 weeks earning it, the same way you earn it from each other, by showing up when it matters and making the right choices when the right choices are hard. He looked at Batman specifically. Keep working on the contingency, he said. Seriously, I want you to solve it. Not because I'm planning to go rogue, I'm not, but because a universe where someone with my power ceiling has no failsafe is a universe that's one bad day away from catastrophe. And I've had bad days. A beat, carrying the weight of someone who had been dead twice and broken more times than the count was useful to maintain. Everyone has bad days. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Barry Allen said, with the particular infectious warmth of someone who had decided long before the meeting ended and had been patiently waiting for the moment to become appropriate. I vote yes. You always vote yes, Barry, Hal Jordan said. And I'm always right. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous in the formal sense. Batman abstained, which was his consistent position on new admissions until the contingency was complete, and which everyone at the table understood as the closest thing to a yes that Batman's operational philosophy permitted. 6 votes in favor, 1 abstention, no dissent. Goku was offered a communicator. It was the standard League model, the same one every member carried. Encrypted, direct line to the Watchtower's emergency response system. He held it for a moment with the particular attention of someone who understood that small objects could carry significant weight. Temporary, Batman said, before Goku could respond. Provisional, until Constantine completes the return protocol and you're ready to go home. And after, Batman looked at him with the gray, steady certainty of someone who had updated his contingency document 17 times in 3 days and was beginning to suspect it would need updating again. We'll discuss it when we get there. Constantine's workshop, established in Gotham's East End in a condemned building whose lease Batman had quietly arranged, smelled like chalk and old tobacco, and the specific acrid quality of dimensional mathematics being worked out in a medium that didn't naturally accommodate them. The work was precise and slow, not because Constantine lacked capability, but because the problem was genuinely difficult, the kind of difficulty that rewarded patience more than force. Goku visited each morning. He brought food. Alfred had identified that Constantine operated better when fed, which Constantine would have denied if asked, and sat in the corner and asked questions about DC's magical framework with the patient curiosity of someone who understood that the universe he'd fallen into was larger and stranger than he'd initially processed. Constantine answered, in the roundabout way of someone who communicated everything sideways. Because everything Constantine knew had been learned sideways, and the habit was structural. He learned, in return, about about its moral component, its emotional resonance, its surprising compatibility with DC's emotional spectrum. He took notes he didn't acknowledge taking. He filed them in a mental archive he would spend the next decade mining. The seal, Goku said one morning, turning the disc over in his fingers. You said it was placed before I arrived. Someone who knew I was coming. Knew isn't quite right, Constantine said, without looking up from his calculations. Arranged is closer. He paused. The seal is old enough to predate the current multiverse configuration. The magic in it isn't Netherrealm, it's something older. Pre-crisis era at the very youngest, and possibly earlier. Another pause. It's got a monitor signature. What's a monitor? Constantine looked up. Beings who existed before the current multiverse to observe it. Most of them died in crisis events. The ones that didn't, he went back to his calculations, are complicated. Complicated how? The kind of complicated, Constantine said, with the specific flatness of someone who had been on the wrong end of monitor-adjacent situations before and had opinions. That tends to mean the situation you think you're in is actually the setup for a situation, considerably larger and less pleasant. He stubbed out a cigarette. Someone pulled you here, mate. Not by accident. The question is whether they pulled you here to help or to, he chose the word carefully, be used. Goku looked at the seal. Either way, he said, I'm here. Yeah, Constantine said. You are. He looked at him with the expression he gave very few people. The one beneath the cynicism. The one that had survived 30 years of damning friends and saving worlds and never quite managed to believe it was worth it. The one that occasionally, reluctantly, encountered something that made it reconsider. For what it's worth, and it's not worth much. For me specifically, I'm glad you are. Goku pocketed the seal. Outside, Gotham received the morning the way it received everything, with suspicion and noise in the particular exhausted determination of a city that had been broken enough times to develop a complicated relationship with the concept of starting over. The rain had stopped. The gargoyles dripped. Somewhere in the distance a siren resolved itself and went quiet. Goku stood on the condemned building's front step and felt the city breathe. Around him, felt the millions of life signatures pressing through the streets, each one distinct, each one carrying its own particular weight of hope and history and the daily decision to continue. His key settled into its baseline hum, clean and warm, oriented the way it was always oriented, outward, toward the lives around him, ready. He thought about Chi-Chi. He thought about the monitor signature in the seal, and whoever had placed it, and what they had intended by pulling a Scion warrior across the dimensional fabric into a universe of gods and shadows and the eternal contest between what people were and what they were capable of becoming. He thought about Darkseid, somewhere in the deep dark of Apocalypse, sitting with the recognition he had felt in Metropolis's sky, the lord of anti-life, having encountered something that his entire philosophy existed to deny, and finding it in the specific privacy of his own ancient cognition undeniable. He thought about Batman's contingency document, still open, still updating. The world's greatest detective, working the problem with the patient thoroughness of someone who understood that unsolved problems didn't stay unsolved, they waited. He thought about 4 million people who had looked up at their sky during a battle between powers they couldn't categorize and found, in the space where terror might have been, something that felt like the opposite of it, something that held back at the moment it mattered most, something that chose the city over the victory. The League communicator was warm in his pocket. He would be home soon. Constantine's timeline was 2 weeks, and Constantine, beneath all the sideways and the cynicism and the chain smoking, was reliable in the way of people who had learned that reliability was the only thing that kept the darkness from winning by increments. But 2 weeks was 2 weeks, and Gotham was Gotham, and somewhere in the sealed chain of whoever had placed the monitor signed, summoning disk in a netherrealm pocket dimension, before a scion from another universe had ever touched DC's dimensional fabric. A thread remained unpulled. Goku stretched, the morning air filling his lungs, his ki expanding briefly to its natural radius before settling back, that warm, clean, outward-oriented pulse that Constantine had said resonated with will and hope simultaneously. He went to find breakfast. Behind him, in the condemned building's shadows, something that cast no shadow of its own watched him go with the patient, ancient attention of something that had been waiting for a very long time and had found, in the arrival of a man in an orange GI who stopped Omega's sanctions with pure character and worried about his wife's anger. Exactly what it had been waiting for. It did not move. It did not need to. It simply watched and waited, and in the space between its watching and its waiting, something that had not existed in DC's universe before 3 days ago settled into the fabric of the world like a new word finding its place in a language that had always needed it, a symbol, golden and clean, of the particular stubborn hope that refused to become anything else regardless of what the universe threw at it. The darkness would have opinions about this. The darkness always did. But the symbol had been placed, and symbols, in a universe that ran on them, were very difficult to unmake. Son Goku arrived in DC's universe as an accident and became something the universe hadn't known it needed. Proof that power built entirely on character could hold against the worst the cosmos offered. He stopped an Omega sanction not by exceeding Darkseid, but by being completely, irreducibly himself, and in a universe perpetually haunted by the question of whether absolute power corrupts absolutely. That answer mattered more than any victory measured in force. He leaves behind a Lex Luthor whose thesis has been complicated rather than confirmed, a Batman whose contingency remains incomplete and honest, a Justice League that voted to trust what it couldn't fully measure, and a Darkseid who encountered recognition and departed to determine what to do with it. The summoning seal's monitor signature remains unexplained. The chain remains unpulled. Whatever arranged for a Scion warrior to fall through DC's dimensional fabric has not revealed its purpose. And in 2 weeks, when Constantine opens the return breach, Goku will go home to Chi-Chi's justifiable frustration and Vegeta's insufferable commentary, carrying, in the warm core of his ki, the memory of a blue world that looked determined from 22,000 miles up, and the quiet certainty that if it ever needed him again, the dimensional fabric between universes was, after all, something he'd already broken once.